We're all set to go here. And he's called Playthrough.
Kia ora team, Tala Falava, and welcome back to another episode of Playthrough, the 7 Touch podcast. I'm your host, Tivoli Guthrie, and we've made it. We've reached the end. We've reached the final episode of our coverage of the 2024 Touch World Cup. About a month since the tournament finished, but that's by the by. I really appreciate you all for sticking around. Now, over the last couple of weeks, you would have seen that we've been previewing and reviewing essentially every inch and every aspect of the 2024 World Cup that took place last month in Nottingham, England. The 10th edition that we've had in the history of our sport, also the largest edition that we've had in the history of our sport as well. And it's been fun. I've had a blast. Hope you've all enjoyed the content as well, as much as I've had putting it together. And I suppose before we get started, I just wanted to quickly say thank you. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day, wherever you're based around the touch football world, to tune in, whether it's been just one episode, whether it's been all of the episodes. I'm really appreciative of your time and allowing me to be able to chat some touch. Now, just a few quick updates that I wanted to share with you all before we start the actual breakdown of the men's. You would have seen last week that we announced our partnership with KBS Sportswear and Apparel. They've got some of the slickest threads in the game, and you will be able to get your hands on some of those threads with an exclusive 7 Touch discount code. So keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of days for that to drop. And I also promised something big, and that something big is only a couple of weeks away from getting off the ground. I can confirm we are about 3 weeks away from that coming to life. What that is, you're going to have to wait and see. We've got some pretty big announcements coming sort of mid-September, so keep your eyes peeled on 7th Touch socials as well as KBS socials. You'll find them at KBS Sportswear and Apparel on Facebook and kbs.sportswear on Instagram and TikTok as well. We're both excited about it, so hopefully you are as well when it launches in just 3 weeks' time. You would have seen as well in the last week that we have now added a subscription option on our Instagram page as well. So for just $5 a month, you can sign up to gain exclusive content. It'll basically be sort of breakdown content, analysis content, basically just looking to grow a sub-community of sorts in our touch world. So if you're passionate about leveling up your IQ or improving your touch knowledge, I'd definitely recommend subscribing. As I mentioned, it's only $5 a month. For that price, it is a heck of a lot less than touch fees. I think we can all agree. But that's just one aspect of it. So the other aspect is if you are an aspiring creative, so that is a photographer, videographer, content creator that covers touch football, you can subscribe. Once again, $5 a month. It's about the same price as a cup of coffee. And any touch content that you cover, if you collab with us, we will accept on our public profile. So not only will that boost your reach and engagement, but basically we can cover some more touch as well. So it's a win-win for everybody that is involved. So let's crack into the episode. Now, the men's open grade is obviously widely considered to be the pinnacle or the blue ribbon grade within touch football. And man, they delivered on all the pre-tournament hype. You know, the standard of play was crazy. There was some sensational skills, the pace, the IQ, the intensity. It was off the charts, and it was great touch to watch. And I think that in large part has to be credited to FIT's change in their eligibility criteria. You know, if they hadn't changed the eligibility criteria, would we have seen the likes of Shan Tormedy playing for the Cook Islands, where 5 years earlier he's running out for New Zealand in the mixed open grand final? Or would we have seen the likes of JP Catalano playing for Lebanon, where 12 months earlier he's playing for Australia at the Asia Pacific Youth Touch Cup, in the same team as Tylan Berryman, who went on to play for the Cook Islands at the World Cup and had a standout tournament as well. You know, then you look at the likes of the Tongan national team and how many of them would have been able to play under the old eligibility criteria. So, you know, I think in large part the competitiveness and the closeness of the men's open grade has to come down to the fact that FIT changed their eligibility policy, and that has been, you know, incredible for the competitiveness on the global stage. When I say that there were deep pools, there were genuinely about 6 or 7 teams across each pool that could, on their day, scrape through into the quarterfinals. A lot of those teams traded results. USA, who came in 4th in Pool A and got through to the quarterfinals, they drew against France, who came in 6th. And then France were beaten by Scotland, who came in 5th within that pool. So that battle between sort of 4th, 5th and 6th within just that pool was incredible to watch, as well as the battle for 2nd and 3rd in that same pool between Lebanon and England. Now, I think a lot of people sort of assumed that Australia would go through top of their table, but they had to work for it. They played against Lebanon, and Lebanon had come out firing, and Australia, when you're used to them winning these games by blowouts, the score was only 8-1 in their game against Lebanon. Same as when they played England. It was 10-5. I think 5 tries is the most tries that has been scored by a team other than New Zealand against Australia at a World Cup. So massive kudos to England. And then their game to decide basically who came second within that pool was easily one of the games of the round robin, games of the tournament even. Lebanon ended up coming out on top with an 11-9 win, but it was highly entertaining. As I mentioned, JP Catalano had a standout tournament, as well as Robert Catalano as well. For the English, you had the likes of Dom Tripp, Louis Triers, Will Lupton had a good game as well. And it was just a really high-quality game to watch. And when the stakes are that high, obviously who finishes second and who finishes third, to see who plays who in the quarterfinals when they cross over to Pool B, it was really compelling. And then you cross over to Pool B, where it was arguably closer. Cook Islands ended up finishing second, Japan finished third, and Ireland finished 4th. But Cook Islands drew against Ireland. And then that game against that game between Cook Islands and Japan, man, that was, if England and Lebanon was a pick for game of the tournament, if there was one game that could eclipse that, I reckon it would be that one. Japan, who were sitting comfortable, leading by about 4 tries, 9-5, I think it was, heading into the last 15 minutes of the game, and then Cook Islands just caught fire. Tamoko Berryman Duff, what a performance. That was incredible, setting up tries, scoring them, and then they managed to win the game on the hooter, 10-9. So, just a fantastic game between two, really, really high-quality teams. And then, you look at some of the other results. Ireland, who we said drew against the Cook Islands, they ended up drawing against Fiji, who finished 9th. Japan had a 1-point win over 6th place South Africa. Singapore, who finished in 7th, had a 1-point win against Tonga, who came 5th. That same Tongan team who actually got over the top of Japan and beat them by 2. So there was some awesome games within that pool. And, I think the closeness and the competitiveness is probably what this World Cup is going to be remembered by, especially when it comes to the men's open grade. And then I think, that's not even taking into account that Lebanon, who ended up coming in 3rd place, were beaten by a team that couldn't even place in the finals in Papua New Guinea. We mentioned a couple of weeks ago in the episode that Papua New Guinea were sort of held back in a sense, or they were messed around by their own administration, who couldn't get them to the tournament on time. So they missed their first 2 days of tournament, and then they had to hit the ground running. They played Lebanon on the first day, or on the third day, their first day, but on the third day of competition. And in a high-scoring one, they got over the top of them and won 12-11. And then they ended up losing against the 5th place France, 5-8. So, there are just all of these results where all of these teams are trading victories and draws and losses, and that just makes it just added that sense of unpredictability. It just, suspended your belief over which team would win, just for 40 minutes. And it was a really compelling and enthralling great to watch, especially the games that were on the live stream. And that's not even taking into account the likes of Australia and New Zealand, who, I suppose we're always expected to get over the top of all the other teams that were in their pool, but they had some pretty competitive games as well. You look at the likes of New Zealand, who were held to just an 11-5 win against Ireland, and then, a 12-5 win against South Africa. And I think their defense throughout the pool games sort of had, well, it would earmark their performance in the grand final as well. I think Australia, on the other hand, they only let in maybe a dozen tries throughout their pool matches. And I've mentioned in the podcast before that, especially in a World Cup, the team that can go in with a better defensive record, they usually go into the knockout stages and eventually the grand final with, more to fall back on, especially when times get tough, as we saw in the Women's Open grade. So, I think all in all, the Men's Open grade was definitely the most entertaining, and I think it would have drawn in the most viewership. I don't know what the viewership numbers were like for FIT on their live stream channels, but those Men's Open games, they definitely would have drawn in a lot of casual viewers. But you get into the knockout stages. Lebanon, they played against Japan in one of them. Another high-scoring affair. Two pretty well-drilled teams. Lebanon came out on top of that one, 11-7. But the match of the round was easily the English and the Cooks. England with everything to play for in their home World Cup, coming up against a Cook Islands team who just captivated the crowd. You look at their supporters and just their entire contingent and the amount of support that they had going into that game. You would have thought that it was a Cook Islands game. You would have thought that it was a game in Rarotonga instead of a game in Nottingham. Again, highly entertaining, high scoring. England led at the break. They were up 6-5, and then that was compounded within the first couple of minutes of the second half when Cook Islands had a player sent to the bin. And, you thought that may have been the turning point of the game, but as it happened, England ended up having a player put into the bin as well. So it was very feisty, a very intense game. You could tell that there was everything to play for. And in the end, Cook Islands, as they did against Japan, although with a smaller margin, they ended up coming home and they won 10-9. And England, unfortunately for an English side that has dominated Euros for the last couple of years, they came in with high hopes and hopes of at least a third and fourth playoff finish. But it wasn't to be. And Cook Islands ended up progressing through to play Lebanon progressing through to the semi-finals to play against Australia while Lebanon played against New Zealand. Those results were quite comfortable in the end. New Zealand got over the top of Lebanon, and then Australia got over the top of the Cooks, and then they played each other in the bronze medal match, which was another great game to watch. And I think Lebanon were well deserving of their bronze medal. 10-8 was the final score. Cook Islands just couldn't really come up with the same type of performance that they did in the quarterfinal and in their round-robin game against Japan. But Lebanon, they won their first bronze medal, participating in their first Men's Open grade since 2007, where they also won a bronze medal. So, there's something in the works there, I think, for Lebanon and for Cook Islands, for that matter, if they can just keep those contingents together, because, for future tournaments, I think they really have a chance of just growing from strength to strength and eventually getting to a spot where they can challenge Australia and New Zealand. And those were the two teams that played out a highly entertaining grand final, a highly entertaining gold medal match. And what a spectacle it was. The game was played at a breakneck pace. It was super intense. Both teams fought tough and they didn't give the other an inch. But there was a little bit of finesse and a little bit of flair in there to top it all off. So what an extraordinary showcase for our sport, where you've got the two best teams in the world fighting at it tooth and nail for the biggest prize in our game. It doesn't get much better than that. And both teams put on a memorable gold medal match, as they have done since the dawn of time, essentially. But the game flowed really well. I thought it was reffed superbly. Credit must go to Dave Baggio, Tony Calabria, and George Haswell as well. It was great to see George back in the men's open arena after reffing in the mixed open at the Trans-Tasman last year. But I thought those three in tandem with each other, they reffed the game really, really well. The first penalty wasn't until like 7 minutes in or something like that, but there weren't many either. So, I thought they controlled the game really well. Both teams did well to sort of abide by and play to their rule. Going into the grand final, it was pointed out to me that New Zealand had played 2 extra round robin games. Australia obviously having only 10 teams in their pool, while New Zealand had 9 teams in Australia's pool, 10 teams in New Zealand's pool, and Australia didn't have to play Papua New Guinea as well. So, I wonder whether that had an effect on the Touch Blacks going into the grand final. Did it lose them the game? Definitely not. But I do wonder what type of effect that would have had having to play those 2 extra games. Heading into the grand final, Australia opted to rest Luke Kane and Jake Notley, obviously going for a little bit of experience, Luke Kane being a debutant at this level. And Jake Notley, I think, was just one of those cases where 7 links doesn't fit into 6, or 6 links don't fit into 5, however they played with their makeup in the final. But their game plan was, everything was off the back of their defense. And I think that's such a hallmark of Australia as a nation when it comes to touch football, is that everything just flows off the back of defense. If nothing's going your way, you just get back to defense. If it's probably the one area of the game that you can, have the most effect on, and you don't have that variable of adding the ball in. Their attack, they just seemed like they wanted to roll off the back of their yards, and when it came to the line attack, they were looking to pinpoint a couple of key New Zealand defenders who, they may have thought in their game planning that New Zealand were potentially weak in. New Zealand, on the other hand, they rested Ray Hanasuta-Finch, which was a big surprise, and they rested Sean Law, who was an experienced campaigner as well. So 2 huge calls from Coach Rahul Das. Obviously with Ray Hanasuta-Finch sitting out, that meant that he played the final with only 2 wingers, which is a really, really ballsy call, and one that I applaud him in, because what that did is that allowed him to basically load up his middles and links. If you have only 2 wingers, you got 6 middles and 6 links that can allow you to play, the up-tempo style that he was looking for, and quite expansive style that he was looking for as well. If you look at New Zealand's game, they were happy to throw the ball around in their own half. Their skill level was exceptional. Just long passes, everything was out in front. And, that's a credit to the work that they've put in over the last sort of 4 to 6 years, or ever since he's been under their guidance. But the first half, New Zealand got the tap off, and I think it's quite an interesting tidbit here, where, both nations have clearly differing philosophies on what to do when you tap off. So Australia are quite happy, generally speaking, to get down to the 7, put on a quote-unquote typical line attack play, and just sort of get a gauge on how the defense reacts, and then they can make adjustments from there. New Zealand had the tap in the final, and their philosophy was to get down to the 7 and put on a quote-unquote trick play, or something that isn't conventional. And you saw Rahul Das go out with that in the 2019 World Cup final, and it almost came off for New Zealand then. For this grand final, though, it was just a little bit clunky, and I think mistimed between Mida Graham and Raiki Willison there. But it's just quite interesting to note that, there seems to be a differing mindset when it comes to starting the game when you've got the tap. That call of only having 2 wingers, that was put to test pretty early on. Australia in their first set of the game, or first couple of sets of the game, within only 2 touches, bombed long ball out to one wing. Trey Poihipi made a try-saving touch in one corner. Then the very next play, Dylan Hennessy bombs a long ball out to the left-hand corner, and Finn Barnett does the same in the other corner. And I think that really set the tone for the crowd because, two pretty impressive try-saving touches from New Zealand's wingers and Australia firing some shots early. I think that really brought the crowd into the match, and quite interesting for the crowd because generally at World Cups, I'm not sure what the reason is, but they just seem to gravitate towards New Zealand. I suppose that's that thing of, everyone loving the underdog story. And Australia are the equivalent of like, a Floyd Mayweather or a Conor McGregor, where they're so good that everyone just wants to see them lose. I'm not sure what it is with us and sport in general, but that's kind of what I liken them to. And that's why everyone gets on the side of New Zealand. They love an underdog story and they want to see the big dogs lose. New Zealand ended up scoring first through Ifor Jones, and that was the catalyst for one of the most impressive individual performances in a World Cup final in any grade ever. He was absolutely on fire in that World Cup final. 4 tries he ended up scoring. He set up another one. So, out of New Zealand's 6 tries, he was responsible for 5 of them. He just had, an incredible game, and it's one of those performances where I don't think there are enough superlatives to describe. But yeah, the first try he scored to get New Zealand on the board, he was fired up about it. A great low diving game, and I thought New Zealand did really well and Ifor did well just to isolate Australia's middles. The 4 tries that he did score were all sort of down the middle channel or middle link channel. The first one he straightened up Jardel Bob coming around off the sweep and then skipped to the outside to dive on the outside. He had another one where he got the ball off a 32 long, off an out ball, and just stood up Peter Norman. He had the other one where he got a crossover quickie and just put on some matrix moves. There's no way that you can analyze what he did for that try. It was absolutely incredible, and the crowd were going nuts for him too. Big raps on Ifor Jones, who ended up getting player of the final, which is massive in a losing effort, especially when you're down by 3. That honour could have just as easily gone to Dylan Hennessy, who led Australia, captaining Australia for the first time in a World Cup, and he was just as incredible for Australia as Ifor was for New Zealand. So it was a great battle between Dylan Hennessy and Ifor Jones throughout the course of the match. They were tit for tat throughout the entirety of that first half. It was hard to separate them, and Australia ended up going into the halftime break with a slender lead. It was only 4-3 at halftime. The game was on a knife's edge, but I think the critical point, or the critical juncture of the match, was how Australia came out of the blocks in the second half. They came out, they had the tap off, obviously, because New Zealand had the tap off to start the game. So they had the tap off in the second half, and, they were patient in their build up, and they ended up scoring a relatively easy try off just a simple rooster play, a 32 peel, the early release from Dylan Hennessy to Peter Norman, and he just strolled over, through a gap that you could have driven a truck through. And New Zealand would have been super disappointed with that. They did manage to hit back through Ifor Jones scoring that incredible try, but then Australia came back again and they scored through James Courtney. They ran a 32 peel going the other way, early release this time to Jordan Marshall-King, quick hands to Jardel Bob, and an insane flick pass out to James Courtney. You got to remember that Jardel Bob is only, I'm not sure, maybe 20 years old, and he's out there in a World Cup final with the audacity to throw a flick pass like that, like it was just another game for him. Australia regaining that 2-try advantage. They managed to hold New Zealand out down the other end, and then the real telling blow was when they were yarding out, and they ran an away set going towards the New Zealand box, and then Jack Edwards comes down on a 32 pick, plays the 4-on-3, and hits Hayden Moffat on a beautiful chop line to put Australia up by 3. And that was the telling blow. New Zealand only going down by 1, going into halftime, coming out of halftime, all of a sudden within the first 3 sets of 6 in the second half, they find themselves down by 3. Australia went bang, bang, bang to have a 100% strike rate to open the second half. So, it was a really crucial time for Australia, and that ended up being a lead that they didn't relinquish for the rest of the game. The dangers of running 2 wingers, as New Zealand found out, was what happens if someone goes down. And that's what happened, or what happens if one of those wingers go down. And that's exactly what happened 5 minutes into the second half when Trey Poihipi cops a boot to the chin. Pretty nasty injury. And at that point, you're left with one specialist winger. But obviously, they had a contingency plan, and that was to put Matt Hutchinson out on the wing, who performed pretty admirably, for someone who typically plays link. One try was scored while Trey was getting stitched up on the sidelines down Matt Hutchinson's wing, but to be fair, that was off a tap back, so it's hard to say whether that's really his fault. But I thought New Zealand did really well while Trey was on the sideline for sort of 5 minutes or so to really try and keep it level, or try and keep it as even with Australia as possible. But I think as time wore on, Australia really ramped up the pressure, and in more ways than one. Their defensive pressure, they were pushing forward on the 7-metre line and really breaking that connection between the New Zealand attack. And because of that, they were able to apply the scoreboard pressure because they had the 3-point buffer. And then as time ticked away, they were able to apply some time pressure as well. So, Australia, they were really clinical, they were really composed, and once they had got that 3-try lead, they didn't really let up. And then Jardel Bob, the rookie, puts the nail in the coffin by scoring off a punish play. And, Australia, for all of their tries, they were really targeting, by the looks of things, Nat Turner in the middle and Lance Davids at link, which I thought, was quite interesting, as they're generally 2 pretty well-renowned defenders, but it worked out well for Australia in the end. So they ended up coming away with the 9-6 win. They add another World Cup title, and they'll tuck that away in the trophy cabinet for another 4 years when the World Cup comes to New Zealand. So I'd love to see another rematch between the two in 4 years' time, and just see what kind of growth they can put together and see how far they can keep raising that bar, because the difference in play between 2019 and 2023 was it was quite remarkable. So really looking forward to that. Australia well-deserved winners. New Zealand still chasing that elusive World Cup title, but we'll see if they can win on home soil in 4 years' time. So that's it. We've made it to the end of our World Cup coverage officially. But yeah, I really appreciate you all for tuning in today and for the last couple of weeks as we've covered the World Cup. Don't forget to like, share, leave a comment, leave a review, do all of that good stuff that will help me grow this podcast and in turn help grow our sport on a global stage, just like the World Cup did. So really appreciate you tuning in. Tune in again soon. We'll catch you. Cheers.